recorded in the beautiful mountains of British Columbia. Welcome to
Friends on Horses.
Welcome back to Friends on Horses. Today we've got Elsa Sinclair, who of freedom-based training, I believe it is, Elsa. Yeah. Elsa, I would love to just get you to introduce yourself to our podcast audience and let them know who you are and what you do.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join you guys. As you said, I'm Elsa Sinclair, and I do something called freedom-based training. And all of this stems from a project that I was challenged to do about 9 years ago now. I had a student that asked me, she said, "Do you really think horses like being ridden?" And I was a horse trainer at the time. And I said, "Yeah, I think they love it." And she said, "No, I mean, like, if horses knew they had a choice, would they want to be ridden by people?" And I said, "Well, you know, adult Mustangs get rounded up all the time and they come in and they become riding horses. And I think they really like it." And she said, no. I mean, like, do you think they knew they had a choice?" And at that point, I was really stumped. I said, I don't know. I don't know if any horse ever knows they have a choice. And so we got in this conversation of how would you do that? How would you set it up so a horse felt like they knew they had a choice? And it was a really interesting thing that I couldn't stop thinking about. And so I ended up developing a project to try and explore that idea. And it's a rather difficult thing to try and look at, but I wanted to try. And I wasn't really able to find any other trainers that I felt had done it in a way where it was really well documented. I really loved all of the positive reinforcement world, but at the same time, a lot of that was very systematic with food. And I thought, I'm not really sure if the horses know they have a choice in that situation because they get so focused on the enjoyable process of it. So I came up with this idea for a project that I was going to get an adult Mustang, and I was going to get permission from the Bureau of Land Management to take them pretty much straight from the roundup to my house. So they would have very little exposure to people before me. And then I was going to use as big a space as I could. And I was going to always stay between them and the fence so they felt like they could walk away from me. Food and friends was going to be readily available in the environment so that it wasn't associated with me. It was just something they had all the time. And then I was going to spend a year and see if in a process of building a friendship, if riding was one of the things we could do together. And then I had a really good friend and she said, "If you're going to do this, we should film it." And I said, "Okay, how do we do that?" And so that's where we ended up going. And, you know, it's one of those things, those turning points in my life where I learned more in that 1 year with that Mustang mare than I think I'd learned in the 30 years previous. And, you know, at the end of the year, we were way more successful than I ever anticipated. But I was broke. I had no money. And so I put all of the footage on the shelf and I went to work and I moved to the city and I became a horse trainer doing, you know, just my standard horse training that I'd done my whole life. And I just put the project aside until I was back on my feet. And then I found some friends who helped me get organized and I ran a Kickstarter and we, I think it was 3 or 4 years later, we put all of that footage and we made it into the movie, Taming Wild. And I really thought at that point that people would go, "Oh, that's a really sweet story. Isn't that beautiful?" And then they would go about their life and I would continue being a normal horse trainer and that would be that. And I had no idea how much hunger there was in the world for people to slow down and take training at a slower pace and explore what that looks like. And so since the movie, I've really been inundated with more and more people who say, "I want to learn how to do that." And so that's what I do now. That's 100% of my time is teaching people how to slow down, read the horses, and do training in a really voluntary way.
That's so beautiful, Elsa. We talked a bit before the podcast started, and I was saying that I think a lot of horse owners, we feel like there's only one way to do things, but you kind of crave a different type of connection with your horse, and you maybe hope that there's a different way you can get your relationship, and you want that really honest, true relationship, which is probably one reason why this has resonated with so many people. And I guess, I mean, what's your feeling on that? Why do you think that it touches? Why has there been such a huge interest in what you do?
I really believe that everybody in the world, horses, humans, everybody just wants to feel better. And once we get to a certain degree of stability in our own life, we really want to share that with everybody we love, whether it's our horse or our dog or our child or whoever it is. We want to say, how do I help you feel your very best? And, I think that we live in a really privileged time where, for the most part, a lot of people in the world have enough food and they have shelter and they have fairly good life. And then they go, how do I spread this good feeling around? The horse is not a beast of burden anymore. It doesn't have to take me to get my groceries. My horse is my companion. How do I share a life with them in a way that makes them feel as good as I feel? Or we can even use each other to continue to perpetuate good feelings. And I think that's the draw.
I love listening to you just kind of talk about just the story of your mare, even just the little tidbits that you've shared so far. And, I think about my own experience with my horses, and I often think about how, there's so much communication that starts even when we just kind of, enter into the paddock to go get them. And, we already have our halter in hand and we're going, and, even that piece isn't necessarily a choice. Like, we're not asking for the choice in like the old school, if I can call it that way, of being with horses. But there's so much communication, like even in body language. And I'm curious, in your work with this mare, was there a point where you kind of almost watched it click for her of how you were communicating with her? Like, did you have to build a language together so that she could find the choice within that language? I don't know if that makes sense. But.
We did have to build a language, but the interesting thing about her is, more than any other horse I've met, they talk about having a clean slate. Mm-hmm. She was the most clean slate I've ever met in my life. And I don't think you get that opportunity very often. But when I walked in the space and she saw that I looked away from her before she got overwhelmed, and that I walked away from her before she got overwhelmed, that first piece really just opened the door between us, where she went, I want to know more about you, because every choice you've made so far wasn't too much. Mm-hmm. And that's an opportunity we don't get very often, because horses have been interacting with people for most of their lives, or even the Mustangs you get have been in holding pens for 2 or 3 months. And their experience with people is everything was too much. So with my mare, I had a really unusual situation where, from the get-go, from the very beginning, she said, everything you do is reasonable, and therefore I'm curious and I want to know more.
What a fascinating foundation to kind of start with. And I think, as horse people, we all strive for that. But again, it's not necessarily knowing that there's a different way. Because we've all kind of learned about horses, whether it's from past trainers or, our own experiences of, there is, like Emma was saying, this certain way of doing things. But it isn't often based out of curiosity, like what you're talking about.
So the basis of what I do is really learning to read the horse and figure out what is enough and what is too much, and figuring out how to choose your actions between those parameters. You know, some people will go and sit in the pasture, and for some horses, that's beautiful. That's right between the parameters. For other horses, they're very irritated by how still you are. So even though you go, well, I'm just sitting here, I'm not doing anything, your stillness will be too much for some horses. And for other horses, when you choose to move, that movement may be too much for horses. And the ability to read their body language and say, oh, I see that was a little much for you. Or, oh, I see that you're craving something a little bit more from me in this relationship. And being able to bridge that or be between those two parameters, that's what allows curiosity to develop, where they go, you are always in that sweet spot between enough and too much.
Right.
It,
Oh, go ahead, Mira.
well, it sounds like there's a lot of, you know, new territory that you're going into or we're going into with this project. And there's also, like, I keep hearing these little snippets of the things that you brought with you, of your knowledge of horses from before. And I'm curious if you can kind of, you know, share a little bit about, you know, the pieces that you took with you into this project and kind of kept versus the things that you really just let go of and realized they maybe weren't serving you in this project from your past experience with horses.
So two things jump to mind. You know, the thing that I really kept, I had adopted a Mustang several years earlier. And at the time I was working with Pirelli Natural Horsemanship, and my goal was to take her through those levels that they had in that system. But when I first got her, I really wanted to do something experimental. I didn't want a halter and a drag rope on like a lot of people do. And I really didn't want to ever chase her around a round pen to teach her to be caught. And so my experimental process with her was I brought a chair and a book, and I sat in the round pen, and whenever she wasn't interested in me, I stared at her and I just looked at her, which she was beautiful. It was really fun getting to look at her. And then as soon as she was interested in me, I was going to read my book, so that she realized that the pressure of my eyes came off every time she was interested. Turns out I was way too excited to read my book. I never read any of my book, but it absolutely worked. And within 10 days, she was absolutely catchable with a halter, and we had her turned out on 100 acres with our 20 other horses at the time. And that felt really remarkable to me. Within 10 days, just using the feel and the timing of my eyes, we were able to build this rapport where she said, if I'm interested in you, you take all the pressure off. And that was all it took. We didn't have to run her around. We didn't have to use a long pole. We didn't have to teach her any of those things that a lot of people do with wild horses. It was just my eyes until she was curious enough to come over and say, I'm interested in more. So that's the piece I really kept, is the power of my eyes and the timing of when you put them on and when you take them off. And that was really useful. The part that I had to discard was this idea that horses will just get used to things. So a lot of times in horse training, you know, if a horse doesn't really like something, we go, oh, we'll just keep doing it. They'll get used to it. Well, that only works if they can't get away from you, or if you have all the food that they want and they have to stay in order to get the food. If they have all the food they want and they have all the friends they want and they can walk away from you, if you repeat something too many times that they don't really like, they just leave. There is no getting used to something they don't like. And I'm a little embarrassed how many times I had to try it in order to have it thrown back at me that that is not going to work.
That's funny you bring that up, because certainly I am much better with my clients' horses than I am with my own. Sometimes with my own, like, okay, I just want to do this thing. I don't want to have to work through it. It can be a lot of breaking those old patterns of impatience and getting the results that are for us, not so much for our horses. That can be really frustrating sometimes, right? There are a couple things that I feel like this segues well into. I've heard you say yield, think, and play before, and I feel like these are all kind of cool tools, and you've brought it up in regards to both our horse's learning process as well as the human learning process. Can you elaborate on those things for us?
Yes. This actually came, I was teaching a clinic in the UK and I had this like epiphany that we always talk about fight, flight, and freeze. Everybody knows what fight, flight, and freeze are. Those are your stress responses. Those are your self-protection responses. And I really like to think of everything in a spectrum. So if fight is the bad side of the spectrum, what if we ratchet it down? What's the positive way of expressing that? And I think it's play. So when stress is low enough, human beings, horses, lots of different animals will play to develop rapport. They don't feel like they have to defend themselves anymore. So they'll kind of poke at each other. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? What are the responses? And that's your play. So play is the good side of fight. Flight, when we ratchet it down, so flight is I just want to get away from you. My stress response to protect myself is I've got to run. But if you ratchet that down, you get to yield, which is I need to make some space for you. Whatever it is you're doing, whoever it is you are, I need to move out of the way just a little bit to give you space to be you. But I'm not running away. I'm just giving you space. And so I think yield is the positive side of flight. And then freeze is where you just don't know what to do. And most people think of freeze as that tonic immobility where like there is complete absence. And that's the extreme version. But even when they talk about animals recovering from tonic immobility, you know, if they're about to be eaten by a predator and they just freeze up to the point where they think they're going to die, at some point, if they're not going to die, they will leap up out of that and start fighting again. Okay, so they will come out of that freeze. Freeze is not forever unless you die. I think that there's a million smaller instances where freeze happens, where horses panic a little bit or get overwhelmed and they don't know what else to do. And what I think that is that's just very, very slow thinking. Okay, their thinking is just kind of shut down. But as they come out of it, if they come to the good side of the spectrum, the ears start to move, the eyes start to blink, the brain starts to process, and it starts looking for solutions. Now, the solution might be, I've got to fight for my life. Or the solution might be, what if I move 2 inches to the right? Am I safer? To the degree they can think really well, they can figure out the best solution. So I think every self-defense, that fight, flight, and freeze, has a positive aspect. And when they can lower their stress, they work in ways that are what we call safe and social. And safe and social are going to be that think, that yield, and that play. And some combination of those three is going to be the thing that really builds a solid community. The fight, flight, and freeze doesn't really build community. It just takes care of the individual. I don't want to die, so therefore I'm going to defend myself. But I think it's not black and white. I think it's a spectrum. And in training, what I try and do is I try and just nudge them towards the positive side of the spectrum and reinforce it. And interestingly enough, the thing that reinforces horses for being safe and social is seeing that someone responds to them in a safe and social way. So when horses act with think, yield, and play, if I respond appropriately with think, yield, and play, it becomes reinforced.
Cool. That's great. Now, for people who might not understand what that looks like, can you maybe give us a little bit of a story or an example just to kind of really help make that solid?
You know, horses are such unique creatures. It's really unique to each one of them. To simplify it, to play is anytime they push into someone else's space and the response is positive. Okay, so it's only play if both partners agree it's play. It's only yield if both partners agree it's yield. So this is a really interesting thing to watch horses develop. Currently, I have 2 stallions. For my 3rd movie that I'm filming, one stallion was from the range, a wild horse, clean slate, but he was 8 years old. So he's had a lot of life experience out in the wild before he came to me. He also was in the holding pens for several months before I got him. So not as clean a slate as the first film, but interesting. The 2nd stallion is a rescue case. He is from the rodeo. He was a bucking bronco. He was bred for it. And he's was about 8 years old when I got him. So he did it for quite a while. He came with a history of attacking people. And I had to sign papers that I thought he was a dangerous horse, and I was buying him from the slaughter pens against everybody's advice. He was exactly what I needed for my film. So I have these 2 stallions, and I had this wonderful idea that they were going to live together. You know, we've got no mares around. They were going to be best friends. It was going to be great. And it actually worked for about 2 weeks. For about 2 weeks, they were friends. And then what happened is my rescue stallion, he has a lot of freeze tendency. So when he's uncomfortable, he just shuts down. I've never seen a horse stand still for longer without moving than that horse does. And what happens is this becomes irritating for the other stallion, the wild one. And so the wild one comes over and starts poking him, you know, a little bit of a bite here, a little bit of a poke here, a little bit of and that would be fine if Atlas, my rescued stallion, could respond. But when he just shuts down deeper and deeper and deeper and there's no one home, Ari starts poking harder and harder and harder. And that goes from play. And at a certain point, it's not play anymore. It starts looking like a fight. And unfortunately, my rescued stallion goes from freeze to being the most athletic, aggressive, dangerous thing you've ever seen in your life. And my Mustang, he's like, whoa, 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 where'd that come from? Like, it doesn't make any sense to him. And that's a really interesting thing where the 2 of them couldn't see eye to eye. You know, here it is, Ari, the Mustang, was playing and playing and playing and saying, wake up, you gotta like wake up, interact, do something with me. And Atlas couldn't respond. So he wasn't reinforcing Ari for playing. He was shutting down more and more and more. And unfortunately, Ari kept escalating until then there was a fight. And then they hurt each other really badly. And then they didn't want to be anywhere near each other. I thought I was going to have stallions jumping my 6-foot fences. They were as far away as they could get from each other. And they didn't want to interact. And they were pacing the fences. And I thought, I can't keep them together. And so I had to separate them. Now, we're farther along in the process now. They can be together again now after a lot of work, but only under my supervision, which means when I see Ari starting to play too much and I see Atlas starting to get overwhelmed, I can step in and I can play and push into their space in a way that says, let's take a walk. Why doesn't everybody just yield a little bit? And then when stress levels are lower, then we can come together and interact. But without my guidance, they can't live together because it just escalates. And then it's all about self-defense instead of about community building.
It sounds
I
like...
love that you shared that piece about your stallion that you rescued, because as you're talking, I'm like, ooh, this works with, you know, your clean slate, you know, Mustang style horse. What does this look like with a horse that has interacted with humans for a really long time with that old school style of interaction? And it sounds like you have found, you know, the horse that will allow you to discover what that's like. And what has it been like so far? Like kind of, you know, for the 2 of you to be working together in this different way?
Oh, I had to learn so much because so much of my education so far has been with really clean slate horses. And so a lot of my feel and timing was just wrong. And, you know, what I say to all of my students is it getting better or is it getting worse? And if it's getting worse, you just did something too much too soon. You have to figure out which thing that is. And whatever thing you did that was too much too soon, you got to ratchet it down to be within that range of acceptability. And I've had to learn to ratchet down with Atlas 100 times more than I do with my clean slate horses. But it is fascinating. And the funny thing is he has a huge fan group because I post videos every week in my Patreon group. And every week I have people who can't wait to see the next little piece that Atlas is learning how to work with.
So I bet that you have to, when you're working with new students, I'm sure there's a lot of, it's okay to slow it down. That's something that's really, really hard for all of us horse people. It's okay to take a step back. It's okay to slow it down. So if you're starting to work with someone new or and their horse and helping them develop their relationship, what are those first beginning steps that how do you start them on that path?
People have a really hard time slowing down. And so what we do is we keep people busy. And so the way I start, and actually this has changed over the years, so this has been an evolution of my teaching, but the way I start now is I have people walk around the space, whether it's an arena or a pasture or a paddock, and you just walk and you just keep walking. Like, don't stop, just keep walking. And what you'll notice is the horse's stress levels go up and down and up and down. And when their stress levels go up a little bit, you'll see a little bit more freeze, like the ears will get more still, the eyes will get more still. And then as the stress levels come down, the ears will start to move and you'll see more thinking. And once you can start to predict those, then you start to time your harmony with the horse for when they're feeling better. So as the ears start to move, you settle into being just like the horse. Look the same direction, put your feet the same way. And what the horse starts doing is they start realizing the pattern, and they realize when I think more, I earn myself a partner. And so they start exhibiting more and more thinking behaviors to try and pull you in, to try and get you to be a partner. And it's really fun because the horse thinks they're training you and you think you're training the horse. And it's a really collaborative process.
Oh, fun. And then it's amazing. So you start off by working kind of with your horse, and you're slowing things down. And I'm assuming in that process, you're learning a ton about your horse's body language and personality that then you can utilize for those next steps. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So the more you know about your particular horse, the more you can tailor your feel and timing to what they need. And, you know, I find some horses are really easy for me and other horses are really challenging. And it has to do more with the personality match than whether they are an easy or a difficult horse. So I can go to clinics and the horse that's really easy for me can give everybody else trouble. And the horse that's really easy for somebody else can really challenge me, which makes for very interesting demonstrations, because when I get overwhelming or I do too much and the horse starts to freeze or flight or fight a little bit more, we can go, oh, isn't that interesting watching Elsa make a mistake? What does she do with that?
Oh. And how do you manage those moments? So when you feel like you've kind of pushed past their barrier a little bit.
So it's an exercise I call looking for mountain lions. So when I have done something too much, I apologize by checking the area for danger. So I just walk a lap around the space and I go, there's no lions over there, there's no lions over there, there's no lions over there. And then I come back and I say, can I try whatever it is that I made a mistake, can I try doing something almost like that, but more tactfully and more respectfully for who you are? And that looking for mountain lions is kind of a reset, where the horse says, yeah, okay, you can try again, showing what you've got. Now, having said that, Atlas, my rescued stallion, it was a learning process when I realized every time I looked for mountain lions, he thought there were mountain lions, and I scared him out of his living mind. So you have to read the horse. You know, I come up with these theories, and if they work for 99% of horses, that's great. But the 1% they don't work for, you go, well, how do I adjust that? So with Atlas, I found that it was really important that I not look for mountain lions because it upset him. But what I could do is I could rake the paddock, or I could move dirt around with my feet. I could look for earthworms. Earthworms were pretty safe. The point is I took the pressure off him for a minute. I did something different, and then I came back and I tried to reapproach with tact. 99% of horses really like you to look outside for danger. There are a few horses for whom that's really upsetting. If you're looking for danger, everyone's going to die.
Fascinating. Hey, do you have kind of a theory as to why that would be so upsetting for him versus with other horses it seems to be calming?
I think that he had a lot of bad experiences. He's covered in scars. He's had a lot of injury. And I think he's had a lot of experiences where when somebody looked for danger, the next thing that happened is you got really hurt. And so it's just a plain and simple link for him. For most horses, when somebody looks for danger, they don't find any, and then everything's safer. But for a horse that's been really hurt, it's not going to work that way in their mind.
How long have you been working with these two stallions now?
So this is a funny story. I was trying to recreate the first movie. So my plan was 1 year. So let's see what happens. I couldn't even touch Atlas in that first year.
Wow.
And he voluntarily offered to touch me for the first time. I think it was about 7 months into the process. So there was no touching between us and no interest from him. He was not interested in the relationship. He had food, he had water, he had friends, he didn't need me. And I was not going to make a movie about that. So, you know, the whole theory of this is that when the horse is free to choose, they're free to choose the timeline too. And so 1 year was not the timeline that was going to be appropriate for Atlas. So the movie turned into a 2-year project, and now we're going into our 3rd year. And it is fascinating. I have a feeling this is a 5-year project.
Wow.
Just guessing.
Talk about a lesson in taking it slow and being okay with the process and letting our horse teachers teach us.
Yep. And, you know, poor Ari, my Mustang stallion, he is so uncomplicated. He gets almost none of my time. I spend a few minutes with him every day, and he's like, "You're cool. I'm cool. We're cool. Go back to Atlas. He needs you." So yeah, it's really interesting. And you know, in that first movie, I'm really glad I got such a generous, clean slate who could really reinforce for me that this was possible. You know, if I had started with Atlas with this process, I would be really disheartened because I would wonder if maybe it was just impossible. Maybe you always needed motivators. Maybe this training horses was not possible without food rewards or without pressure of a fence panel or pressure of some sort. Because I had that first really good experience with Myrna and the first movie, I realized that it's okay for it to go slower. As long as everyone's safe and everyone's healthy, I don't need Atlas to change. I want him to feel better, but I don't need him to feel better now. If we can work towards feeling better tomorrow, that's plenty. That's okay.
And what are you and Atlas doing right now? So what are you working on together?
So when I spend time with him, he's really comfortable at the medium distances. So that's far enough away that I can't touch him. And he's really comfortable with the far away distances. So those are the distances I use for reinforcement. Okay. He's a little bit uncomfortable anytime I get close enough to touch him and anytime anything approaches him. So we try and in times when he is a little bit bored, disinterested, life is just not giving him a lot to look at, I will push the boundary a little bit. I'll get a little bit closer. We'll work on approaches. We'll work on touch. And when he's really interested and he's starting to engage and really be part of the process, I retreat out to the reinforcement distances. So at this point, I can touch him all over his body, which is very exciting. Haven't gotten the dreadlock out of his tail yet, but we're working on it. We actually picked up a foot for the very first time a couple of weeks ago. And we just picked it up and put it down. But he didn't run away. He didn't fight. This is big progress. I introduced a brush for the very first time this week. So we haven't done any grooming because anything that goes away from his body and comes towards his body repeatedly is terrifying for him. And so a brush, you know, you pick it up and you put it on, and you pick it up and you put it on, and that was going to be too much for him. So we have taken almost, well, a full 2 years to get to the point where I can groom him. And so this last week, my update video was about brushing Atlas and showing his responses. And what's funny is I lost track of time, and it was going so well, and I was having such a good time. I didn't realize we've been working for hours. I had been grooming, and I was like, there's another dirty spot and another dirty spot. And I'm so excited I can finally clean the horse. And what's funny is I had the camera on a tripod filming, and you can see him getting more and more and more overwhelmed. And you can see me just missing it. Like, I'm so happy to get these patches of dirt off of him. And at a certain point, he's like, I can't do this anymore. And he bolts past the camera. And you can see me just go, oh, in hindsight, so obvious. And then I have to, you know, reapproach, apologize, not go directly to the spot I was brushing, not even use the brush, use my hand, retreat to the point that he can be interested again, and then build up his trust little by little. So.
Wonderful.
It's simple stuff. But then when you start to really read the eye movements and the ear flicks and the tail swishes and the twitch of a muscle, it's actually fascinating. It's like the best novel ever written, in my opinion.
I totally forgot to ask earlier, but with your first mare, this question just popped back into my mind. Did she actually offer for you to ride her? Was that where things ended for you? Because that was your original kind of what tweaked you towards this project.
She, I made more mistakes than I care to admit with her. I would not say she offered. I would say she adapted to the fact that I wanted to ride. And over time, she grew to be her favorite thing under the sun. She loved being ridden. After the movie was finished, I actually did some teaching where I would teach other students with her, and I would walk them through the process with her. And I insisted that everybody do an hour of things on the ground before they ride. And Myrna would repeatedly take them to the mounting block and be like, don't you want to get on now? It's really fun. I could take you for a ride. Just hop on. And I'd be like, no, you have to finish your hour. When you finish your hour, then you can ride. And she was the most excited about the riding part. So I feel very successful. I did a lot of things too much too soon when I was trying to ride, which didn't make it easy for her to offer. You know, if somebody offers and then you take too much, they give an inch and you take a mile, they don't want to offer again. And so that was a very humbling learning experience for me. And so I would do too much, and then she would just walk away. She never had to run. I mean, I was not like I could stop her. She'd just wander away, and she'd be like, no, you took too much. And then I'd have to apologize, and then I'd have to start again and do what we could do. And then we'd build up to the point where I could swing a leg over and I'd take a mile instead of an inch. And she'd be like, no, that's too much. And she'd walk away again. And because that was the process that I had to learn, there wasn't room for her to offer. There was room for her to accept when I asked for a reasonable amount, and then build on that until it was more and more enjoyable.
Good answer. And as usual, Mira, I feel like you were reading my mind, because that's where the direction I was going to go too. And I've got another riding question, because some people, might be going, oh my God, okay, I build this beautiful relationship with my horse on the ground. How does this transfer into my ultimate goal of riding? Like, how does this new system of communication work when I'm sitting in the saddle and I'm not standing beside my horse?
So I believe horses communicate by their movements around each other. So whether they're standing in front or behind, and then they switch to beside, and then they switch to far away, these changes in position are the way they communicate. I see what is reasonable for you. I see what is too much. I see what is not enough. And they communicate that by their choices, their own personal choices. When we as people sit on a horse's back, it's just one more place you could be. You could be on the left side of their neck, you could be on the right side of their neck, you could be sitting on their back. The problem is we get up there and we don't get down again until we want to. And so what we end up doing in most horse training is we say to the horse, when you learn to tolerate as much as I want, then it gets easier for you. But what you want doesn't really matter. And that's how most riding is taught. The way I teach it is I teach them to get comfortable coming up to a mounting block, because that's really important to me, because if they had a hurt back, or maybe they, something happened during the night that I don't know about, they won't come up to the mounting block. They'll say, I know what happens after that, and I'm not going to offer to come to the place where you get on me if I don't want you to get on me. So that's my first important part. Second, when I get on and I get off the other side. I just cross over their back. And at the point where that's really comfortable for them, I can stay up there for a little longer. It's no different from me being on the left side of their neck or the right side of their neck, or sitting on their back. The point is, can I get off before that feels overwhelming to the horse? And then can we develop it to the point where they are not ever overwhelmed by that feeling? They say, yeah, I'd like you to stay there. And we've all had that experience with, a horse that likes to be hugged. You can wrap your arms around them and bury your head in their mane, and you can feel that they love it as much as you do. And then you try it on another horse and they're like, ugh, stop hugging me. It's too much. You can develop anything if you have the right feel and timing. But if you're always doing too much, they learn to always resist and push you away. So, yeah.
Good answer. We don't have a ton of time left, but I've got, Mira, if you're okay with it, I've got a couple of questions from a client of mine who is a fan of Elsa's. That works.
Totally, let's do it.
Yeah? Okay. All right. So, one of her questions was actually, and this works well with what we were just talking about. She's wondering if when you're riding a horse, do you guys communicate about, like, does your horse get to choose sometimes when they get a trot or a canter?
So I developed really early on in my training something that I call the hand to nose touch. Horses do this really easily. You put your hand out, they tend to touch it with their nose. After that happens, where we have an agreed meeting, my hand comes towards them, their nose comes towards me. When we have that meeting, everything gets easier. If I know the horse well enough, I know what easier is for that horse. Once that's really established, anytime a horse starts to feel overwhelmed, they have a choice. They can go to fight or flight or freeze, or they can reach around and say, hey, Elsa, could you make this easier? I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. And they reach around, and if I reach back to them as they reach to me, I'm saying, yes, I can make this easier. Now, this develops over time to when I'm going to make the decisions for both of us, or they're going to make the decisions for both of us. So when after they do that nose touch, if they want to eat grass, I hang out with them while they eat grass. If they want to take me for a walk, we take a walk. If I move their body, I back them up, turn them left, turn them right, then it's my turn. And I get to make all the decisions until we do that nose touch again. Now, hopefully I do it before they take leadership back from me, because if I take too long to offer them that nose touch, they're just going to walk away. So there's a certain amount of wisdom that goes with this. Once I'm riding, in the beginning, it becomes the nose to my boot instead of my hand, because that's a little easier for them to touch. And then it actually builds into being eye contact. So when I'm riding, if I've asked them to slow down or speed up or do something, I'm making decisions for both of us. And it's my turn until I give it back to them. Now, hopefully I'm wise about when I give it back to them and I do it soon enough. But when I look down and they look back at me and we make eye contact, I'm saying, your turn. What do you want to do? So when I'm out on the trail riding my mare Myrna from the first movie, if she makes eye contact with me, I know that she always wants to go faster. Okay, so if we were walking and I make eye contact, we're going to be trotting next. So if I don't want to trot, it's really important that I don't make eye contact. My other mare, who's also in the first movie, Cleo, she's the opposite. If we make eye contact, she is always going to slow down. So if we were trotting and we make eye contact, we're going to be walking.
So know your horse.
You got to know your horse. Yeah. So that's how I transfer leadership back and forth. You get to be the leader for both of us, or I get to be the leader for both of us. And hopefully we know each other well enough to know when it's okay to say, yes, you can make decisions for me right now.
I love that you've developed a cue, a language between the two of you that you can both use. That's fantastic. And then another question. So how do you deal, and I think we talked a bit about this already, but how do you deal with a pushy, too much in your space horse without a stick? And to give you some background, she's got this beautiful Andalusian baby, 2-year-old, about 16-1, I would guess, who is, I mean, a 2-year-old is all about play, right? And she's not quite sure what steps she could add to her training process. So, and I know that you don't know the horse, so we can only generalize, but yeah, go for it.
Well, I would say safety has to come first. So if you need to carry a stick, you carry a stick. If it was me and it really felt unsafe, I would work from outside the fences until their stress was low enough that they interacted with me in a way that felt safe. Mm-hmm. Once I feel safe, for the most part, if a horse pushes into my space, what I do is I put my hand on their body and I run it towards their tail as I walk to their tail, and then I walk away. And they will turn around and they'll come after me, and I do it again. I have never had it take more than 20 times to have them settle. Actually, that was Andrew Wady's horse.
Oh, really? Oh.
Andrew Wady's mare is just the most vivacious, wonderful, interactive, playful mare you've ever met. And when I was there with her in Costa Rica, it was really funny. Amadora was just having none of this distance work. She wanted only close, playful interaction. And so we did this thing where you just run your hand down her tail and walk away. And it took about 20 repetitions before she just went, all right, yeah, we could just settle a little bit.
Good answer. And as a behaviorist, I obviously work with a lot of horses with behavioral issues, right? Mm-hmm. And we use protective contact a ton. And I think a lot of people don't recognize, they feel, and by protective contact, I mean what you were saying, Elsa, right? Like working with a fence between you, right? And I feel like it helps the horse feel safe and the human feel safe, which is a wonderful tool, even though people will often feel like if they're not in the space with the horse, what are they getting done? But a lot can happen across a fence line, hey?
I will actually add to that, my 2 stallions, they live side by side, and I've set up hay feeders where the fence is literally down at their knees, but they have a huge wide hay feeder between them. So they will both eat hay together, and they'll be on their best behavior because they don't want to start a fight. But then they will go around to the really tall fences to have a play fight where they both feel safe.
Oh, I love that. That's so cool. I love that so much. That's adorable.
Yeah. So protected contact is actually something I see horses use a lot, where they say, I want to interact with you, but I don't know how safe I am. Could we go over to this place where there's something between us so that we can interact more, but I feel like I'm not going to get hurt?
Yeah. Wonderful. And I believe those were her 2 big questions. And if she listens to this and is like, Emma, you forgot something, then we'll just have to do another podcast.
We can always do that too.
Yeah, yeah. Mira, do you have any other questions for Elsa?
Well, you're working on your video, you've got your training that you do. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about just, people who feel really inspired. How can they get in touch with you, learn more, maybe go a little bit deeper down this very exciting rabbit hole?
So probably the easiest way is to go to tamingwild.com, which is my website. And there you'll find all the links to the various things that you'll find my email address. You're welcome to email me. You'll find a link to Freedom-Based Training 101, which is a video that I made. It's the first class of my online course, but it's free to everyone. And that gives you just the beginning basic process that anybody can do. And if you have questions, you can go ahead and email me or join the Patreon group. We have a lot of good conversations around that there. And then beyond that, I do an online course that takes 8 weeks. I only take 12 new students at a time. So my spring course is actually already sold out and my summer course is halfway sold out. So that's a really limited thing, but it is the best way to learn freedom-based training because I can walk people through it a week at a time. This is the slowest way to train a horse on the face of the planet. You don't do it because you want fast results. You do it because you want to know your horse that deeply. And I love it. I do all of the homework along with my students. So I am working on my foundation at the same time my students are working on their foundation. I also teach clinics when the world opens up again. But really clinics are just about like a little taste of this work. It's fun to interact, but it's not something that can be done over the course of 1 day or even 4 days. It's something that you start the ball rolling and then you just kind of want to see where it keeps going.
Wonderful. All right.
If we're curious to take one of your courses, do they need to have a horse?
I have had people who borrow their neighbor's horse. You're not putting a halter on them. You're not using food rewards. You are spending time with them in their home space. You don't need to own the horse to do that. You need to feel a certain affinity for them and you want to spend time with them, but it doesn't need to belong to you now.
I love that.
Okay, so for all of our listeners, go ahead and find Elsa Sinclair online, and we'll put all of her social media, website, all that kind of stuff in the podcast description. But Elsa, thank you so much. What a pleasure this has been.
Thank you. I love a good conversation with like-minded horse people.
It's the best. It really is. Mira, is that a wrap?
I think that's a wrap.
If you want more Friends on Horses, you can find us on Facebook at Friends on Horses Podcast.
Check it out for all the latest and greatest horsey news.
You can find us on the web at friendsonhorsespodcast.com.
Or Instagram at friendsonhorses_podcast.
Like what you hear? Help us quit our hay jobs by supporting Friends on Horses. You can support us by rating our episodes on iTunes.
Becoming an ongoing sponsor through Patreon.
Or simply by spreading the word about our show.
Have some feedback?
We'd love to hear from you.
Contact us via email at friendsonhorses@gmail.com.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.